I froze the second I saw that notice slammed against my door. The HOA thug thought he could scare my pregnant wife with paper fines. He didn't expect my Marine son to pull the receipts and corner him in broad daylight. And that was only the beginning. Clifford slapped the folded notice against my screen door hard enough that the frame rattled. The sound cut through the chorus of cicadas that had been steady in the muggy air. He didn't say a word, just pressed the paper to the mesh until I reached for it. The brass lantern hanging on the porch rail burned on steady as a heartbeat, its warm light daring him to make his point. I watched his SUV idle at the curb headlights, throwing a slow sweep over the neighbors' driveways. Kids' bikes lay in crooked piles on the grass, one wheel still spinning in the damp evening air. Somewhere down the block, the smell of barbecue ribs drifted from a grill's sticky sweet smoke that had always meant home. Tonight, it mixed with the taste of iron in my mouth. Ellen stepped closer, one hand to her chest as if to still her heart. "What does he want now?" Her voice was low-clipped the way it got when she didn't want the kids 2 doors down to hear. I unfolded the notice. The county seal looked official enough, but the wording was vague, almost lazy. Violation of Section 3.2 Exterior Fixtures. That was it. No photo, no diagram, no explanation beyond the bold sentence demanding I remove non-compliant decorative lighting within 10 days. I glanced at the lantern. My father-in-law had given it to us on our first anniversary, its brass polished by decades of weather and hands. It had hung on his porch before ours, steady as a sentinel. Nothing garish about it. Just a glow, warm and even. Clifford leaned out the driver's window. "Rules are rules," he called, his smirk catching the last bit of light. Then he revved the engine and rolled on slow enough that I could see the neighborhood reflected in his side mirror, one manicured lawn after another, a row of mailboxes standing stiff as soldiers. Inside, Ellen pressed the notice flat on the counter. The ink bled slightly where my thumb had sweated against the paper. I booted up the old desktop, the fan whining, and opened the HOA portal. The bylaw citation was the same Section 3.2. Nothing else, no context. Just an email form at the bottom. Direct questions to the Compliance Committee. I typed out a line. "Please clarify the nature of the violation," then stopped. A word like clarify sounded too formal, too combative. I deleted it. Wrote again. What exactly is wrong with the lantern? The cursor blinked, the smell of barbecue smoke still faint in the blinds. Ellen leaned against the fridge, arms folded. "If they force it," she whispered. "What then?" I reached across the counter, taking her hand. The paper crinkled under my palm. I didn't answer. Silence felt sturdier than words. Outside, the SUV crept past again. Headlights swept across the porch, catching the lantern's brass curve and throwing a sharp flare across the screen. The windows were down Clifford's elbow, propped casual against the frame. He circled once, twice, then eased away toward the cul-de-sac, the hum of his tires sinking into the heavy night air. I stayed at the door, the notice still warm in my grip, the lantern glowing steady beside me, untouched, unbowed. By October, the neighborhood had learned the new dance. Dog walkers cut to the far side of the street when I stepped out to sweep acorns from the porch. A pair of 7th graders on scooters fell silent when they passed my mailbox, then laughed too loudly once they were beyond earshot. I caught a sentence blown thin by the breeze not meant for me. "He picks one family at a time." I stared at the lantern until the reflection in its curved brass blurred. The light was steady, patient, like it had nothing to prove. Ellen set a mug beside me on the coffee table in the living room and pulled the curtains in half, letting in a sliver of noon. Her tea had gone cold. The ring it left on a folded envelope looked like a damp moon. "We can end this," she said, voice soft. "Just take it down. Put it up again when all this blows over." "It won't blow over," I said. "It'll move over." She pressed her lips together, and for a moment I wished I had kept the thought to myself. A stack of envelopes sat between us, past due notices for things we didn't owe, friendly reminders, newsletters with smiling clip art that somehow managed to sound like a threat. I spread the board, minutes I'd printed out, months of them. Each page had the same stilted phrases, and at the bottom the same initials, neat and unhurried. CB, like a stamp that never dried. That afternoon, I walked 2 doors down with a borrowed paint scraper and a batch of oatmeal cookies Ellen insisted I bring. June and Paul Garrison answered before I knocked. June's eyes went to the gift wrap first, then to my hands, then to the lantern visible over my shoulder. "We heard," she said, then stepped aside. "Come in." Their foyer smelled faintly of lemon polish. In the hall, where the light hit just right, a thin drip of a gray paint had dried on the trim, a narrow tear frozen mid-fall. Paul saw me notice and gave a small, embarrassed shrug. "Door color," he said. Wasn't subdued enough last year. We had to repaint in November. Same shade, different brand. He said the undertone was wrong. June set the cookies on a plate and leaned against the counter. They sent the notice 3 days before Thanksgiving. Said delays would incur a seasonal fee. We missed our daughter's flight home because the paint needed a second coat. I didn't have anything wise to offer. I reached out and touched the dried drip with my fingernail. It flaked a little, then held. Did the board vote on it? Paul's laugh was dry. Board, it's Clifford. He brings the papers. People sign because they want him gone from their porch. We carried our mugs to the den and sat where the late sun made dust look like gold. I unfolded one of my printed packets and smoothed a page on my knee. I've been reading the minutes I said. Do you see this? I tapped a line where enforcement report appeared without details. At the bottom, the initials again. Every month the same. No motions listed, just handled. June folded her hands around her mug, the porcelain faintly crazed with age. When my sister needed a ramp, he said the slope was visually aggressive. Can you imagine slope? She shook her head and her voice thinned. We paid the fine because I couldn't stand the letters coming twice a week. Out the window, a man in a polo shirt slowed when he saw me through the glass. Then he stared at his phone and took the long way around the cul-de-sac. Paul watched him go without comment. Back home, the living room felt smaller, the ceiling lower. I laid the minutes across the coffee table in rows like a dealer arranging cards. Ellen sat opposite feet, tucked under her fingers, worrying the seam of a cushion until a thread pulled loose. Harold, she said, gentle but firm. Do we have to carry this alone? I kept reading. The printer ink had bled where the page met a drop of condensation from my glass last night, blurring maintenance into mainte. I could hear the click of my own jaw as I chewed the inside of my cheek, a habit I'd never managed to break. I traced the initials again and again as if the repetition might conjure something useful. What are you looking for? She asked. A seam, I said. You pull on seams. You don't punch walls. I set the paper down and rubbed the crease between my eyes. There's a pattern to this. Same initials, same wording. No votes, recorded notices delivered at dinner time, so there's an audience. Ellen reached across the table, her fingers cool around my wrist. I believe you, she said. But belief doesn't lower my pulse when the car slows in front of the house. We ate without talking, the oven ticking as it cooled. Later, as I carried the dishes to the sink, a shadow moved across the sheer curtain. I held my breath for a beat, then exhaled when it kept going. Habit was turning me into a sentry. At dusk, I walked back to the Garrisons with a folder I'd labeled in pencil. June met me on the porch with a sweater draped over her shoulders. The air had a bite to it now, summer finally relenting. I made a list, I said, opening the folder to show them the headings. Dates, notices, any votes you received. Paul nodded. We can write it out. Might be good to put it down. He looked past me to my house where the lantern was a small planet against the darkening sky. I like your light, he said, almost shy. Makes the block look like people live here. On the way home, I slowed in front of the Franklin place. Their doorframe wore the same faint drips, a pair of tear tracks down the side jamb. On the sidewalk, someone had chalked a hopscotch grid. The numbers were smudged where a shoe had dragged the 9 box barely legible. A small reminder of play, edited by weather and feet and time. Ellen had the lamp on in the living room when I came in. She'd braided her hair back from her face the way she did when she needed order. I called my cardiologist, she said without preamble. He thinks I'm fine. I told him it's just pressure. I sat across from her, let that settle, then slid the minutes toward me again. If we take it down, I said slowly, we tell him he can knock anywhere he wants and people will open. I'm asking about us, she said, not him. Her eyes were steady. I need to know you won't make this your whole life. I won't, I said, and heard the lie in the first beat of the sentence. I started again. I will try not to let him make it mine. She held my gaze, then nodded once. Then we do it together. We stayed like that for a while, the room quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and the occasional night vehicle passing. I gathered the minutes into a single stack and clipped them with a binder clip that clicked too loudly in the stillness. When I slid the top page into the lamplight, the initials caught me again, neat, sure, like the hand of a man who never rushes. Ellen reached for my hand across the table. Say it, she said softly. That light stays, I said. It's not just brass, it's our word. We sat with that not as a banner, but as a bench to rest on. Outside, the lantern's glow slipped through the blinds and laid a thin band of gold across the minutes. The strip of light made the black ink look darker. At the bottom of the page, where signatures and approvals should have made a small chorus, the same letters repeated themselves month after month as if pressed by a mechanical hand. Rain found its rhythm on the diner's front window, a steady drumming that made the fluorescent tubes hum louder. Martha Ellison slid a dog-eared binder across the table, the vinyl seat squeaking as she leaned in. The cover said Covenants and Bylaws in a font that pretended to be important. Her gold ring caught the light when she flipped it open to a section already bristling with tabs. "Start here," she said, tapping a page with the side of a red pen. Her nails were clean-trimmed practical. "You've been looking at enforcement. Look at spending." Bacon grease hung in the air, woven with coffee gone bitter on the burner. The waitress topped off our mugs without asking and moved on the pot, grumbling. I wiped a circle on the fogged window with the back of my knuckle, leaving a clear oval that filled with beads of water almost immediately. Martha underlined a paragraph with that pen, slow and exact. "Section 6.7c, she said. "Anything over 500 needs a board vote documented signed by 2 officers. Routine, not emergency. Emergency is defined elsewhere." I'd spent months looking for openings in the wall Clifford built. The wall was made of notices and minute small words delivered in big ways. "He writes 'handled' a lot," I said. "He does," she answered almost kindly. "And if you can show money moving without process handled becomes a rope, not a shield." I read the clause again, lips moving soundlessly. The paper was soft along the margins from being touched too much. Red ink stood out like a road flare. My eyes drifted to the footnotes. There were more of them than I wanted there to be. "How do I get the numbers?" I asked. "Invoices, approvals. Start with what's public," she said. "Newsletters project summaries. Then ask for a records review in writing. Polite. Paper trail. If they stall, you've set 2 clocks, your requests and theirs." The waitress returned with a plate of eggs that wasn't for us, set it at the next booth where a trucker sat staring at his phone. She glanced at the binder, the red lines across the gray text, and gave me a half-smile like she'd seen men try to learn rules too late before. Martha turned a few pages back. "You're not the only one," she said, voice lower. "I've kept notes. June and Paul's ramp was fined as an aesthetic deviation, though accessibility is exempted under the same section. Eliza Franklin repainted a door that was already gray. 2 families got letters during medical leaves." She paused as if weighing whether to hand me more than paper. Patterns are polite until they're not. Outside, a car hissed over the wet street. I watched its taillights smear red on the glass. "He picks one family at a time," I said. "That's how people like that keep their hands clean," she said. "But signatures accumulate. People forget that." She tapped the margin where the initials for secretary and treasurer were printed in small caps. "Where you see the same hand alone, note it. I said, CB shows up like a watermark." Martha capped the pen. "Then follow CB. Don't argue about the light on your porch. Argue about the money that paid for the fence, the sign, the special mulch that washes into the drains every storm. Argue," I repeated and heard the way the word fit poorly in my mouth. I'd always preferred numbers to arguments. "I'm not a litigator." "You're an auditor," she said. "That's a better thing to be right now." She slid a blank legal pad toward me, the kind with a red margin that feels like a line you shouldn't cross. "Make yourself a checklist. Vendor name. Amount, authorization signatures, date, purpose. Check, check, check. Where you find a missing box, you ask a small, calm question in writing." I wrote the headers in careful print. The paper scratched under the cheap pen, and for a moment the sound drowned the rain. My hand felt steadier than my chest. "You sound like you've been here before." She thought about that eyes on the window where the world was now all softened edges. Families sit in my living room when things break. Sometimes it's a fence leaning into a public sidewalk. Sometimes it's a letter saying the wreath on their door isn't sufficiently neutral. They apologize for making trouble. She swallowed the last word like it tasted bad. "We'll make a different kind of trouble." The diner door opened, and bell jingled in a tired way. Daniela from 2 streets over shook her umbrella in the entry. When she saw me, her shoulders went up, then down. She came to the edge of our booth. "I can come back," she said. "Sit," Martha told her. "Tell him the thing about the bins." Daniela slid in damp hair clinging to her cheek. "Last summer he left me a notice for leaving the recycling bin out past curb time," she said, making finger quotes she looked embarrassed to make. "There is no curb time in the covenants. I emailed the board. Handled." She traced a circle on the condensation with her index finger and looked at the trough her movement left. I thought I'd imagined it after a while. Write a statement, Martha said. Dates, exact wording if you have it, any replies. 2 paragraphs. Keep it plain. Daniela nodded. I saved his email, she said. I couldn't make myself delete it. She glanced at me. You think this matters? It's a brick, I said. Walls work both ways. She smiled a little. My students say that kind of thing. They like when a rule gets explained in a way you can feel. When she left, the bell clattered again. A draft lifted the napkin on my plate and laid it back down. Martha turned another tab. Emergencies, she said. 9. 4A. True emergencies have objective markers. Gas leak collapse hazard. Not aesthetic cohesion. When he calls something an emergency, ask who decided and what evidence they relied on. Ask for photographs. Permits contractor license numbers. Permits, I said, adding it to the list. Licenses. Don't overcollect, she warned, a finger to the list like a schoolteacher who'd learned where boys speed. 1 photo that shows a measurement. 1 invoice that shows a signature. 1 minute that shows a missing vote. 3 is plenty when they point the same direction. I looked at my own reflection in the window, a blur behind rain. And when he pushes back, Martha smiled without humor. You let him. People pushing tend to leave fingerprints. I sat back. The vinyl creaked. I pictured the lantern at home steady on the porch while the cul-de-sac performed its rituals around it. Not a banner exactly, a baseline. I can do this, I said, and it surprised me that it sounded true. Martha leaned forward, elbows on the table, the way etiquette says not to. The red pen made one more mark a bracket around the paragraph we'd already underlined. Paper never lies, she said. Voice low enough the words felt heavier. Let him drown in his own signatures. The waitress slid our check under the edge of the binder and left a chocolate mint on top. I folded the legal pad, slid the binder back, and stood into the sleeve of my coat. Outside, cars threw white noise into the dark. In the glass, the smear of a warm circle appeared near my shoulder, where the interior light met the water clinging to the pane. For a second, the reflection looked like a small lantern. Then a raindrop traveled through it and bent it out of shape. The final notice came folded in thirds, the kind of careful crease that says whoever prepared it enjoyed the act. Remove non-compliant fixture within 48 hours or face escalating fines. The language wore a polite smile. Below it, the signature line was blank, but prepared by compliance sat there like a rubber stamp that didn't need a hand. I read it twice at the kitchen counter, then slid it under my palm so Ellen wouldn't see my knuckles whiten. She stood at the sink, turning her wedding ring with a thumb the way she did when her pulse ran fast. 48 hours, she said, and the words thudded between us. Outside, the cul-de-sac was quiet in the way January gets quiet sound pulled flat by cold. I'll check the charter again, I said, and even I could hear how small that sounded. She dried her hands, watching me like she was trying to measure the distance between refusal and foolishness. I don't want this house to feel like a courtroom, she said. Neither do I. I picked up the notice already curling a bit at the edges from the steam, but someone already put a judge's bench on the porch. On my way out, I stopped by the lantern. The brass was cool as a doorknob in winter. When I tightened one of the cap screws, it stuttered under the screwdriver and then wobbled in place, a tiny give I hadn't felt before. Not a break, a hint. The sort of looseness you only notice when you're looking for it. The garage light came on with a hum that buzzed behind my teeth. Shelves of old binders and plastic tubs made a canyon down the middle. I pulled the folding table from behind the lawnmower and locked its legs open with a snap. The motor oil smell lived in everything out there, the cardboard, the cotton rags, the rubber handle of the stapler I found under a stack of tax folders. I set the legal pad from the diner in the center of the table and wrote across the top in the block letters, requests and responses. The HOA portal password worked on the first try. I scrolled the project summaries, the kind of cheerleader copy that promises enhanced curb appeal in a 13-point font. Somewhere in the Community Improvements page, a paragraph I'd skimmed before flickered like it had been waiting for me to look hard enough. Emergency landscaping to address perimeter erosion and safety done last spring. No photos. 1 line, no link. I sent a records request right there, polite as Martha had trained me to be. Please provide the invoice S board vote documentation and officer signatures associated with emergency landscaping. Spring 2019. I read it once for temperature, once for grammar, then hit send, and listened to the little chime as if a bell had been struck in some other room. While I waited for the automated receipt, I opened a gray tub labeled HOA, MISC. A drift of newsletters slid out, some with the ink feathered at the edges from the humidity of last summer. I skimmed the cheer block party pool pass reminders, the font that wanted me to relax. Tucked between two issues, a trifold flyer I didn't remember saving fell into my lap. Perimeter beautification update. The photos were stock children spinning under a tree that wasn't ours. On the back, a single-line project authorized by compliance. My inbox pinged. Your request has been received. Below the auto-response, another message arrived faster than I liked. Records attached as provided. That phrasing made me brace. There were 3 PDFs. The first was a one-page work order complete note with a digital logo in the top corner and a signature field that read C, Marsh, Compliance. No second signature. The second was an invoice $13,200 in a font that looked too proud of itself, Emergency Landscaping. Perimeter Stabilization. The third was a scan of a check request sheet, line items typed to the bottom scrawled in pen. The same initials I'd seen at the end of so many minutes. CB. I printed all 3. The laser toner left a fine dust on my fingertips. On the invoice, a small coffee thumbprint someone else's had stamped the margin. I held the paper under the fluorescent tube and the amount glowed as if backlit. $13,200. Under Approved By, there was one name written like a person who wrote their name a lot and enjoyed the rhythm. The garage door creaked. Ellen stepped in sweater, wrapped tight bare feet on cold concrete. I heard the printer, she said, voice careful. Good news? I turned the papers so she could see the headers without seeing my face. Emergency Landscaping, I said. Authorized by one person. No second officer, no vote. If it was truly an emergency, they'd have photos permits a contractor license number. Do they? She took the invoice with the 2 fingers like it might smudge. No, I said. Just this and a work order with a friendly logo. She looked at the number and then at me. $13,000. Plus change, I said. Always plus change. A draft slid along the floor, the door not quite sealed at the bottom. I watched it lift the corner of a dusty drop cloth and lay it down again. The hum of the light filled the silence between us. What happens if you push? She asked. He pushes back, I said, and leaves fingerprints. She gave me the smallest smile. You sound like Martha. I sound like a man who finally knows where to put his hands. Ellen set the invoice on the table and rubbed her wrists as if the cold had gotten inside the sleeves. We could still take the lantern down, she said. Not a surrender, a read of the field. Just for now, while you do this. She gestured to the spread of paper like it was a patient waiting for surgery. I thought of the screw's small give under the driver, the way a structure tells you it's under stress if you're willing to listen. If he touches that lantern, I said quietly, the words surprising me with how steady they sounded, he touches us. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was not fear exactly. Then, keep the paper between him and us, she said. Promise me that? I promise, I said, paper first. I made a copy, set 3 sheets, then took a black marker and wrote in the margin of each Sacker 6.7C, dual signature required. The letter C looked like it could bite. I slid one set into a manila envelope labeled Fence Emergency. Though we hadn't talked about a fence yet, the word felt like it belonged. The second set went into the fireproof box under the workbench, the key cold, where it swung from a hook. The third I tucked beneath the legal pad with the checklist Martha had drawn like a map. From the doorway, Ellen watched the ritual without interrupting. She'd seen me do versions of it for years with tax returns and receipts stack label copy stow. The muscle memory calmed the parts of me that wanted to shout into a quiet room. The garage light flickered once and steadied. Somewhere beyond the wall, the heater kicked on deep and throaty. I pressed my index finger to the invoice total hard enough to feel the ridge of toner through the paper. The number rose under my skin like braille. When I lifted the page to the light again, the ink made a halo around the digits. 13,200. No comma in the glow, just one big shape. I held it there until the edges of the paper blurred and my arm began to tremble from the look-up angle. Then I lowered it and laid it flat on the table where the hum made a quiet stage for it. The screw on the lantern had given under my fingers. This would not. I stood a long time, the invoice between my hands, numbers burning pale under the fluorescent tube, while the rest of the garage fell away. The tape hissed and locked against the bottom rail. 4.5 inches. I measured again. Still 4.5. County code allowed 4. Paul's retriever pawed a corner post, shaking it like a loose tooth. Easy, Duke, Paul muttered. Chlorine drifted from the pool. Grass clippings stuck to my shoes. A country song floated from a nearby radio, thin against the evening hum. "Spacing's wrong," I said. "And these screws, wrong grade already rusting." Paul leaned in. "They bought cheap." A minivan rolled by. A toddler stared from the window. I checked another gap 4 5/8. Sloppy work. No one even measured. Footsteps. Lucas appeared, crisp haircut, jaw set. He held up a flash drive. 6 months of backups, newsletters, drafts, emails. Clifford's fingerprints all over. "Resident portal," I asked. "Left wide open," he said. "If they didn't want eyes, they should have locked it." Paul shook his head. "Same story. They used an unlicensed crew. One guy wore flip-flops on the job. I crouched at the northeast corner. The footing crumbled under my thumb, and no permit posted. That word fit in my mouth like a lever. If it exists, we'll find it. If not, the county will." Lucas nodded. "Database check tonight. If there's nothing, we attach photos. Plain sentences, no fluff." The tape snapped back in its case. Sweat dotted my clipboard. Paul added, "That crew poured footings after rain. See the cracks?" He pointed at hairlines like spiderwebs. I photographed them, timestamp glowing. Lucas lifted his phone. "Got audio too, card reader, beep pool in background." Context matters. A boy climbed the play structure. The rail sagged. His mother shot us an apologetic glance. Paul murmured, "County letter waiting to happen." "It's more than that," I said. "It's numbers against signatures. Numbers don't blink." Lucas pulled up an email draft on his screen, perimeter beautification talking points, wording lifted straight from Clifford's landscaping invoice. At the bottom, acting compliance chair. "Self-promotions come with self-approvals," I said. "Invoice fake emergency fence gaps. The trail writes itself." Paul scratched Duke's ears. "All you need is patience. They don't have that." I sharpened my pencil with the pocket knife I'd carried since the firehouse days. Lucas leaned closer. "So, we build the file like an audit." I nodded. "He can't outrun the math." The sun slid behind the pool house shadows, stretching. I was rolling the tape when a darker shape stepped into mine. "Evening." Clifford's voice carried like he owned the syllable. Polo collar, frayed sunglasses shoved on his head, though dusk had arrived. "Busy documenting," I said. "What a hobby." He glanced at my clipboard. "Two kinds of residents, those who enjoy amenities and those who sue them out of existence." Lucas shifted steady. "We like safe amenities." Clifford's eyes narrowed. "New here." "Just back," Lucas said, flat. Clifford rocked on his heels. Would be a shame if a household paid more in fines than in dues, or if liens became necessary. "Paper cuts add up." The word lien landed sharp. I steadied my voice. "We keep our paper. We keep copies." "Do that," he said. "But keep digging and you'll lose your house." He let it hang, then walked off, shoes scraping the concrete. The pool gate beeped behind him, a tidy period at the end of his threat. I reeled the tape, the hook catching my thumb. Numbers slid back into the case with a clean snap, truer than his smile. The newsletter arrived, folded in thirds, dropped on every doorstep like a verdict. My name bled across the front page in bold, tax delinquent. No explanation, no numbers, just the words stamped like I'd stolen from my neighbors. Ellen found it first standing in our driveway, lips pressed tight. By evening, the multipurpose hall glowed under buzzing fluorescence. The air smelled of stale coffee and floor polish. Folding chairs scraped the tile as neighbors trickled in, some clutching the newsletter like proof, others avoiding my eyes. The brass lantern flickered weakly outside, screws rattling whenever the door closed. Clifford stood at the front with his arms folded, face set in a grin just shy of gloating. "Some residents," he announced, his gaze fixed on me, "fail to honor dues. It's a shame when communities carry dead weight." The whisper spread through the room like a cold draft. Ellen's hand found mine, clammy. Lucas leaned forward in his seat, 2 rows back, jaw tight. I straightened my folder of invoices, each page creased from my thumb. I raised my voice, careful and slow. "Those dues were paid. I've got the receipts." Clifford chuckled as if I were a child caught in a fib. "Receipts can be forged. But character. That shows through." I opened the folder, sliding out the invoice stamped in red with Clifford's signature. 13,200. Emergency landscaping. Authorized by you alone. No board approval. A few heads turned. Paul cleared his throat in the back. The secretary looked down at her notepad, pen frozen. Clifford waved a hand. "Procedural. Residents don't need to drown in details." Lucas stood unhurried and walked to the folding table. He set down a small recorder, its red light blinking. The click cut through the hall. For the record, he said. Everything tonight is documented. A murmur rippled. Clifford's grin faltered for a beat, then returned tighter. Recordings require consent. Lucas smiled without showing teeth. Public meeting. Anyone can request minutes. I'm just making sure the truth makes it in. I felt a current run through me. My voice steadied. Madam Secretary, I said, turning toward the woman scribbling half-heartedly. Please read Section 6.7c into tonight's minutes. She blinked. Clifford snapped. That's unnecessary. Read it, I said louder. My throat burned, but I didn't look away. She shuffled the dog-eared charter Martha had slipped me months ago, eyes scanning the page. Section 6. 7c. She read slowly, all expenditures exceeding $5,000 require full board vote documented and posted within 30 days. The room went still. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to dim. Clifford shifted knuckles whitening against his folder. Ellen clutched my arm, nails digging through my sleeve. Don't let go now, she whispered. I didn't. The secretary looked at me, then at Clifford. Was this landscaping approved? Clifford's tongue darted across his lip. Timing was urgent. Storm damage, Paul called from the back. There was no storm. A low ripple of voices rose, some nodding, others frowning at me like I'd broken some unwritten code by speaking out. Clifford slapped his folder shut, but the sound landed hollow. I stacked my copies neatly. The paper doesn't lie, I said, echoing Martha's words. And tonight it's in the record. The recorder's red light blinked steady patient as a heartbeat. Martha showed up just after dusk, her sedan headlights washing across the garage door. I had the space half-lit, the single bulb overhead humming like it always did, casting long shadows over the oil stains. She stepped inside, carrying a sealed envelope thick enough to bow in her hands. This one's mine, she said, sliding it onto the workbench. I've kept records longer than I care to admit. The seal glistened county crest pressed into the flap. I hadn't opened my own intake letter, yet it sat off to the side untouched. The embossed mark seemed to glow in the low light, daring me to claim it. Ellen leaned against the doorframe cardigan pulled tight around her. Her face looked thinner than last summer, but her eyes tracked every move. Lucas stood behind her, arms folded, jaw set like he was back in uniform. Martha reached for the envelope, tapping it once with her nail. Section 6.7c. I've pulled every instance Clifford signed past the limit without approval. 7 times in 3 years. I felt my pulse rise. The paper smelled faintly of dust and ink, as though it had lived in filing cabinets for decades waiting for this night. I slid the envelope toward me, thumb brushing the edge. Lucas leaned forward. So, this is it. Once he files, county has jurisdiction. Correct, Martha said. It leaves the board's shadows. Clifford can't bury it once it's out of his hands. I reached for my pen, the cheap ballpoint I always kept near the ledger. The complaint form waited under my palm, each line filled except the signature. Ellen stepped closer, her hand trembling as she steadied the paper. I'll sign too, she whispered. Are you sure? I asked, turning to her. Her smile was faint but steady. They've leaned on you long enough. If they come after us, they come after both. I placed the form in front of her. The pen wavered in her grip ink, blotted a little on the corner, but the letters of her name curled across the line. Lucas steadied her elbow as she finished. The rain picked up outside, soft patter against the driveway. Martha nodded with something like relief. It doesn't have to be loud, Harold. Just exact. The county won't care about gossip or newsletters. They'll care about invoices and missing approvals. Her words echoed in my chest. Paper never lies. I closed the folder, pressing my palm over the pages as if to fuse them. We sat in the garage a while longer, rain seeping in with the smell of wet leaves. Lucas tightened the screws on the fireproof box I'd bought from the hardware store. The metal clicked shut with a finality that felt heavier than its weight. My intake letter still lay unopened on the workbench. I tore it gently, the embossed seal cracking under my thumb. Inside, a single page. Notice: investigation opened upon receipt of complaint. I read it twice, then again making sure the words stayed steady. Ellen exhaled beside me, tears threatening. This is the turn, Martha said quietly. Clifford's reign lives and dies on paper, and you've just set the first stone. I slid the county letter into the binder, locked the clasp, and tucked the whole thing into the fireproof box. The lid shut with a deep echo. No way back now, I whispered, my breath clouding in the cool, damp air. The community center buzzed before the meeting even began. Folding chairs scraped across the tile, neighbors settling shoulder to shoulder. I carried the binder against my chest, its weight familiar now, as steady as my own breath. When I reached the board's table, I set it down. The thump echoed louder than it should have. Through the glass doors at the back of the hall, the brass lantern's glow slipped in faintly. Ellen had polished it earlier, insisting the light be turned on before we left. Its reflection lingered like a promise. Knox, the board president, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. We'll begin. First item: complaint against Vice Chair Clifford Hunt. The hum in the room stilled. Clifford sat 2 chairs down, jaw set tight. He tried on a smirk, but his fingers tapped against the table faster than he knew. Martha caught my eye from the second row, calm as ever. Lucas stood near the wall, arms folded. Ellen's hand rested on her purse, knuckles pale. I opened the binder pages, crisp with tabs and signatures. My voice shook at first, but steadied. Invoices signed without board approval. Landscaping billed twice. Playground fence built without permit. Each tied to Clifford's initials. I laid the copies one by one on the table paper, rustling under the fluorescent hum. Clifford snatched at one. This is out of context. His voice cracked. Read the dates, I said quietly. They don't lie. Knox leaned in, scanning the page. His brow furrowed. These amounts. Clifford, this exceeds discretionary spending by thousands. The neighbors murmured, the sound growing like a tide. Someone whispered, so it wasn't just us. Petition sheets circulated down the rows, pens scratching as people signed. Lucas stepped forward and placed a small recorder on the table. Its red light blinked steady. For the record, he said. Martha rose, voice level. Section 6.7c. Bylaws, adopted 1998. Any expenditure over $2,500 requires full board approval. These documents show unilateral action. Clifford's face flushed red. This is a witch hunt. Knox slammed the gavel once. The sound rang sharp. Order. He glanced toward me. Do you have confirmation from county? I pulled the letter from the binder, its embossed seal catching the light. Notice of investigation opened, I read aloud. All expenditures under review. Gasps spread across the hall. Ellen pressed a hand to her mouth. For a moment, the only sound was the faint beep of the recorder. Knox straightened glasses, sliding down his nose. This board will not be a party to misconduct. All in favor of suspending Vice Chair Hunt, effective immediately. Hands rose around the table, one after another, steady and unanimous. Clifford froze, eyes darting as though a door might open for him to escape. None did. Knox brought the gavel down. Suspension carried. Clifford Hunt is relieved of duties pending investigation. The room erupted. Not with chaos, but with relief, the kind that breaks after years of quiet pressure. Neighbors who'd avoided eye contact for months now leaned together, signing petitions, whispering thanks. Martha touched my shoulder as she passed, eyes bright. You let the paper speak. I gathered the binder, sliding the county letter back inside. Clifford's chair sat empty by the time I turned. He'd slipped out without a word. When we reached home that night, the air was cold and sharp. I walked to the porch lantern, waiting. The screws I had tightened the day before held firm, the brass polished to a soft gleam. Ellen flipped the switch. Warm light spilled across the railing, steady and unbroken. Neighbors walking past lifted their hands. Some waved, others simply nodded, but the gesture landed all the same. Lucas clapped my back, solid and reassuring. I stood there longer than I meant to, hand on the railing, watching the glow spread out across the cul-de-sac. It wasn't just a lantern anymore. It was proof that silence can end, that dignity can be restored, that community fractured and bruised can find its light again. By the time the clerk stamped the last page, the hall seemed to breathe again. Outside, the brass lantern held steady against the winter dusk, its glow no longer questioned. Justice, I found, isn't loud. It lives in receipts, signatures, and the quiet nod of neighbors who finally see the same truth. The board restored our fees, rewrote the rules, and left a cleaner trail for those after us. If you've ever felt cornered by paperwork or silence, remember patience plus proof can tip the balance. Where has your neighborhood found its steady light lately?